Victoria has many different railway operators across the state, these being Metro Trains Melbourne for suburban trains within Melbourne, V-Line for regional trains, as well as road coaches across Victoria, and then Pacific National and Southern Short-Haul Railway for interstate or just Victorian freight trains. However, in case you didn't know, Victoria's railway network used to have a lot more operators than what it does today. The operators that existed before our current ones, these are Victoria's forgotten railway operators. Freight Australia was originally formed as Freight Victoria in March 1999 when it was announced by the Victorian state government as the successful bidder for the state-owned V-Line freight business. The sale included 107 locomotives and more than 2,800 freight wagons. At this time, Freight Victoria's fleet consisted of P classes rebuilt from T classes, as well as one brand new V-class locomotive built new in 2002, as well as Y-class locomotives used in yard shunting services, S-class locomotives, A-class locomotives, G-classes, XR classes rebuilt from X classes. This green and yellow livery was adopted on the locomotives. Freight Victoria soon gained contracts outside of Victoria. In October 1999, it began hauling logs from Queen Bee into Port Kembla, as well as in December 1999 from Wallerawang, and so in March 2000, the company was renamed to Freight Australia after gaining more and more contracts outside of Victoria. However, in October 2003, Freight Australia was put up for sale. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC for short, looked at the sale, fearing that Pacific National would create a rail and freight monopoly if it won control of the operator. However, in March 2004, Rail America announced it agreed terms with Pacific National to sell the business subject to government and regulatory approval. And in August 2004, the Victorian government approved the transfer of the Freight Australia infrastructure lease to Pacific National. Very little of the freight that Freight Australia holds remains with Pacific National, with most of it going to road, with a small amount going to other rail operators. The West Coast Railway was formed on 19th September 1993 when the Kennett state government offered long-distance country rail services previously run by the government-owned operator V-Line to private operators. Bids were lodged in February 1993 and West Coast Railway was announced as the successful tender on April 30th the same year. The initial franchise was for 8 years with operations commencing in September 1993. Subsequently, a 3-year extension was negotiated. The West Coast Railway's fleet consisted of S-class diesel locomotives, as well as B-class locomotives, and even R-class steam locomotives. I'm sorry, what? Now, supposedly, West Coast Railway was running steam locomotives to attract more tourists. While most other rail services tendered were replaced by road coaches, West Coast Railway successfully tended to retain a rail service. During the 11 years of West Coast Railway operation on the Warrnambool line, the Warrnambool line's patronage increased by 20%. However, this wouldn't last forever. West Coast Railway encountered a series of operational difficulties during 2003 and 2004, which severely affected its business. The closure of the Warrnambool line between Melbourne and Geelong for 5 weeks in January and February 2004 to allow its rebuilding as part of the Regional Fast Rail project meant that the company had to replace rail services with road coaches, which would lead to a significant drop in passenger numbers. However, only 2 months after rail services had resumed, the Victorian Department of Infrastructure issued an alert on stress cracks of the underframes of the B and S class diesel locomotives, including the units owned by West Coast Railway. Once again, the company was forced to replace 2 of its free daily return rail services with road coaches. With the expected locomotive repair bill to be in excess of $1 million, it decided to not seek a renewal, and on August 31st, 2004, West Coast Railway operated its final services, with V-Line resuming services the following day. In October 1997, in preparation for privatization, it was announced the Met's suburban rail operations would be split into two operators, those being Bayside Trains and Hillside Trains. Connex Melbourne, originally Hillside Trains, was formed on July 1st, 1998, and took over operation of the Lilydale, Belgrave, Alamein, Gwilym, Waverley, Epping, now Murder, and Hurstbridge line services. Until 2002, the Connex train fleet consisted of Comenge trains built throughout the 1980s and the older Hitachi trains built throughout the 1970s and early 80s. However, in 2002, as a partner of the consortium, Alstom would supply and deliver new trains known as the Extrapolis 100 to the Hillside Trains network. However, these new trains were not great, their design was cheap and they had a dodgy layout for the driver's cab. Hillside Trains was rebranded as Connex Melbourne in July of 2000. However, in April 2004, Connex had engulfed M-Train, and from then on, Connex was the operator for the rest of Melbourne's network. During January 2009, Melbourne experienced several days of extreme heat with temperatures in excess of 43 degrees Celsius, with a maximum temperature of 45.1 degrees Celsius in the Melbourne CBD. Prior to this, the ambient temperature was between 38 and 40 degrees Celsius. Connex was unable to guarantee services across the network. This was highly controversial, as in previous years, heat waves did not cause train cancellations. The immense heat also resulted in severe track buckling across Melbourne's rail network. On January 29, 2009, over 500 services were cancelled. The next day, services on 8 lines were cancelled and the City Loop closed in the afternoon owing to extreme weather and knock-on effects and the loss of power at the South Morang transmission station. In response to the loss of services, the state government made January 30th a day of free travel on trains, trams and buses. In August 2007, Connex's contract was extended until November 29, 2009. Viola Transport was shortlisted to bid for the new franchise, but lost to Metro Trains Melbourne. And so on November 29, 2009, Connex Melbourne operated its final train services across Melbourne on that day, before the next day Metro took over. As mentioned already earlier in this video, Melbourne's rail network was privatised in 1998, and so on July 1st, 1998, M-Train, originally known as Bayside Trains at that time, took over the other half of Melbourne's railway network. M-Train fleet until 2002 originally consisted of Comenge and Hitachi trains. However, a new train known as the Siemens Nexus, built by Siemens, was introduced from 2002 and entered service in 2003. Unfortunately, in December 2002, National Express handed in its Victorian rail and tram franchises, having been unable to renegotiate financial terms with the state government who took over operations. And so on April 18, 2004, M-Train spent its final day operating before all of it was consumed by Connex Melbourne the following day. And that's all for today's video. If you guys enjoyed, please do consider liking and subscribing and commenting on the video. Thank you very much for watching.